Alrighty, hi guys. So I have noticed in past semesters that students have significantly struggled with the Mendelian inheritance one. So I figured I would run through some example problems to help you see how to even go about some of these, because some of them are pretty challenging. And not all of you will get the chance to go to tutoring or things like that, and it may get confusing. So I decided I'd put together a little video running through example problems that are similar to the ones you'll find in the homework, that in order to give you an idea of how to go about tackling these. Sound good? All right. So there are two separate worksheets for this week. We've got the simple Mendelian inheritance worksheet and the sex-linked Mendelian inheritance worksheet. I recommend personally that you start with the simple Mendelian inheritance one, because as the name implies, this is the simpler one. This is the basics of Mendelian inheritance, and sex-linked is kind of like, once you understand that, now we'll move out of high school into college kind of thing. It's the next level up. So it's based on what you learn in simple Mendelian inheritance. This just throws in a couple of twists. So first I'm going to start with the simple Mendelian inheritance. So we call it Mendelian inheritance because it's named after a gentleman by the name of Gregor Mendel. And he was a priest that did some genetics crosses with pea plants and discovered these inheritance patterns. And so we named him after him. So that's where the name Mendelian comes from. Really all it is just the name for this inheritance type pattern. So here's the first example here. In roses, flower color is an autosomal trait. Now, pausing right there, what is an autosomal trait? There are two different types of traits, autosomal and sex-linked. Here's a little picture of a karyotype right here. A karyotype, we kind of mentioned them a little bit at the beginning of the semester. But a karyotype, all it is a photograph of the chromosomes in someone's cell. Now, this particular individual has Down syndrome. You can see there are 3 chromosome 21s there. We've gone through and sorted out all of their chromosomes from chromosome 1 down to the 23rd set, which is the sex chromosomes there. And this particular individual has 3 there. But everywhere else, you'll notice that there are 2 of every single one. The autosomal, well, actually, let's start with this. These are the sex-linked ones right here. Those are the sex chromosomes. We call them the sex chromosomes because they are the sex-determining chromosomes. Because if you have XX, you're female. And if you have XY, like this gentleman does, then you're a male. These other ones, all the other 22 pairs, are the autosomal chromosomes. The definition of the autosomal chromosomes is anything that is not a sex chromosome, which happens to be 1 through 22, because 23 is the sex chromosomes, X and Y. So anything that we do autosomally is going to be on these guys. And notice, chromosome 8 doesn't determine what gender you are. You can get either chromosome 8 from either parent and it won't change what your gender is. The only one that affects that are these guys right here. So we are going to call these guys autosomal, and these guys down here we're going to call sex-linked. Now, this becomes important because there are different things we have to consider. So the autosomal ones are easier, and that's what we're going to start with. The simple Mendelian inheritance page is actually concerning the rules for the autosomal chromosomes. So that's why I'm starting there. Okay, go over here. Looks like I have to get rid of that. Okay, there we go. All right. So in roses, flower color is an autosomal trait. That means it's on one of the first 22 pairs of chromosomes. Red flower color is dominant to white flower color. If a red flower who had a white parent mates with a white flower, what is the probability of getting a red rose? Now, let's discuss how this happens and how these charts work. You're familiar with how we did meiosis, and then you had to do like, we did sexual combinations and things like that. When you do meiosis, you wind up with haploid cells. Remember that? So you end up with sperm if you're a male and eggs if you're a female. And each one of those contains one of the two chromosomes for each of the sets. So a haploid chromosome for a human would have 23 chromosomes in it, as opposed to the standard 46. In a normal person's cell, there are two of each type, like this. And but we are going to make a sperm or an egg, which means only one of these is going to get transmitted to the child. So we're going to actually split these guys up. If these are the paternal chromosomes here, we're going to stick this one here and this one here. And if these are the maternal ones, or moms, we're going to stick these over here and stick this over here. Now, these are the two chromosomes. Let's say it's chromosome 1, just for simplicity. So each person has two chromosome 1s, because that's what our karyotype told us. And so dad has two chromosome 1s, and so does mom. Notice they are ever so slightly different colors because they're homologous chromosomes. Now, if you remember what homologous chromosomes are, they are almost exactly alike, but they're not perfectly alike. They're not sister chromatids. The difference here is they're the same length, and they carry the same genes, but they don't necessarily carry the same alleles of those genes. An allele is simply a variation of a gene. So if the gene is for eye color, one allele is brown eyes and one allele is blue. They're two variations of a trait. So this one, if these were eye colors, this chromosome carries an eye color gene. And that eye color gene, let's say if I do transcription and translation on that gene, I will come out with a protein that colors my eyes brown. This one, however, still carries an eye color gene because it's a chromosome 1, but when I do transcription and translation, the protein is ever so slightly different, and it actually turns my eyes blue instead of brown. So that's why they're different. They both contain, that's why they're homologous as opposed to sister chromatids. They both contain an eye color gene, but they don't both have the same variant of said eye color gene necessarily. In some cases they do. Okay, so what the Punnett Square is, again, it's named after a scientist. The Punnett Square is just here to see what possible combinations of kids these parents could have. For example, what if the sperm that's carrying this one, let me bring it down here. What if the sperm that is carrying this chromosome meets up with the egg that is carrying this chromosome? Well, I would end up with a child that has the dark blue one and the dark purple one. And if we said this one had brown eyes and the dark purple one had brown eyes, then that chromosome is producing brown-eyed proteins, and this one's producing brown-eyed proteins. So what color do you think the child's eyes would be? They'd be brown. Okay, now what if we took this one and brought this one down here? So this sperm is actually the one that meets up with this egg. Well, if the light ones mean blue, then this kid got a gene that codes for a blue protein from dad, and a gene that when you do transcription and translation ends up with a protein that colors the eye blue from mom. So this person gets a blue protein and a blue protein, and you end up with blue eyes. Now what if, now this starts to get kind of interesting when, let's say we do this possible combo where dad contributes the dark and mom contributes the light. Well, the dark one, we said, makes a protein that results in brown eyes. Mom's, when I do transcription and translation, ends up with a protein that is blue. Now, what color would your eye be in this case? Because now your eye is producing both brown and blue pigments. This is where the principle of dominance comes in. Dominance is basically one trait overpowers the other one. So assuming they're both present, one protein, let's say brown is darker than blue, and so brown shows up. Or that could be the case. Or sometimes a protein shuts down another protein. Or it could happen for various reasons. But what we do know is that one trait or one allele is usually dominant to or more apparent than another one. So in this case, brown, in this eye color example, brown is dominant to blue. That means in this combo, this one's going to make a brown protein, and this one's going to make a blue protein, and together, the brown is going to mask out the blue and make this a brown-eyed child. Does that make sense? So let's mark here. Let me see. Let me use color coding. I'll just use a little brown spot here to say brown eyes. Because, let's see here. We'll color this one blue. Okay. So this, we said that this protein, this one over here produces brown-eyed pigment, and this one over here produces blue-eyed pigment. But what I just finished telling you was that the brown one actually ends up overpowering the blue one. Let me make that actually happen here. Overpowering the blue one, and you end up with brown eyes. Okay. That's going to actually be the same thing over here, because if we try this combo where I take mom's dark and carry it across, and I take dad's light and carry it down, I end up with a kid that's got a gene that codes for a dark or for a brown protein from mom. So let's bring up my little brown protein up here. And this one over here from dad codes for a blue protein. So which one did we say was dominant? Brown will overpower the blue, and this child will have brown eyes. So we've determined that that one has brown eyes, and this one has brown eyes. Now this one, we said, if I combine dark and dark, I'm going to end up with a brown-eyed child, because if this one produces a brown and that one produces a brown, you wouldn't expect their eyes to be blue. You'd expect it to be brown because all they're producing is brown proteins. So now all three of these possible combinations end up with brown eyes. Now what about this one? If I take the pink copy from mom and carry it across over to here, and I carry the light blue one from up here, from dad, down to here, I end up with two light-colored chromosomes, and this one makes a blue protein, and that one makes a blue protein, and that means you will end up with blue eyes. Because now, why does blue eyes show up here, whereas in the other places we masked it? Well, blue is only masked if brown is present, and in this case, neither of this child's genes are producing brown pigment, and so their eyes are blue because the brown's not there to hide it. So we call the more powerful ones dominant, and the ones that are more prone to be hidden by the dominant ones recessive. This is where, or this is important now. This is how these charts work. All we're doing is the same thing, except instead of dragging things, we're just visually, well, if we connect the dots here, what combo results? If we connect the dots here, what combo results? So if in roses, flower color is an autosomal trait, red flower color is dominant to white flower color. So when we do these things, we use uppercase letters. We pick a letter. We use uppercase letters to signify a dominant allele. and we use lowercase of the same letter to signify a recessive allele. So in this case, I'm going to use the letter R. So let's say a half and half individual would be big R, little r, where little r is the recessive trait and big R is the dominant trait. Up here it says red flower color is dominant to white flower color. So what color would this particular parent be? They'd be red. They'd be red because the red trait is more powerful or dominant to the white trait, and so this one will overpower that one and the flower will turn out red. What about if we did this combo? Well, that one would be red because this one makes a red one and that one makes a red one, and so it turns out red. The only way that we will end up with a white one is if we get two little r's, because then there's no longer a red trait to overpower them and the flower will come out white. Okay, sorry, I keep ditching off of this problem here. Your red flower color is dominant to white flower color. So a red flower that had a white parent meets with a white flower. What is the probability of getting a red rose? Okay, so if a red flower, now what did we say were the two possible combos you could get for a red flower? You could either have big R makes a red flower. You could have big R makes a red flower because the big R overpowers the little r. And if little r shows up, what color will it be? It'll be white. So we know it's a red flower. That doesn't help me much because the red flower could either be big R or big R, and we need to figure that out. That's why this next statement is included. Who had a white parent? So dad flower, we'll just call the red flower the dad flower in this case. The red flower had a white parent. Well, what's the only possible combo that gives you a white parent? Little r, which means his dad, or dad's dad, grandpa, only had little r's to give him. Remember, every kid is a combination of a chromosome from their dad and a chromosome from their mom. So grandpa had to contribute a little r to dad. Does that make sense? So we know dad, since grandpa was white, grandpa had to be little r because that's the only white option. Grandpa gave a little r to dad, but dad is still red, which means what is dad's genotype? Dad has to be big R, because he had to get the little r from grandpa, we were told that, and he had to get the big R in order to be red, which means he got that from grandma. Okay. Now what is the wife flower in this case? She's a white flower. And what's the only combo, if you look down here, that gives us a white flower? Well, little r is the only one where a big R doesn't overpower it. So she, by default, has to be little r. Notice I didn't need to know her parentage. It doesn't matter. There was only one option that results in a white flower. I needed to know his parentage because there was more than one option that resulted in a red flower. He could either be homozygous red or heterozygous. Okay. Now all we have to do is visually do what I did with my little chromosomes over here, in that we are going to fill in the boxes. So this box represents, if I take this letter and bring it down, and this one and bring it down, in that the big R chromosome gets stuck in a sperm and sent down, and the little r chromosome gets stuck in an egg and sent down, we would end up with big R, little r. And usually we write it with the capital letter first, just out of convention, so that you know that's the dominant one. So I guess it would technically be right if you write it like this, but we usually write it like this for simplicity. Big R, little r, because he got the big R from dad and a little r from mom. But what about this combo? The little r comes down from dad, and the little r comes across from mom. You end up with little r, little r. What about here? The big R comes down, little r comes across, we end up with big R, little r. And right here, we end up with little r, little r. So then what colors are these offspring? Big R, little r ends up being red because the big R is the red allele, it's dominant, and it overpowers the white allele. So we end up with these two being red, and these two are white because there's no red to overpower them. So it's little r, makes it white. Now, what does this chart mean? Does that mean that if they have 4 kids, 2 of them will be red and 2 of them will be white? Not necessarily. What this means is for every single pregnancy, if flowers get pregnant, I'm not quite sure what word you'd use for that. If flowers could get pregnant, for every single pregnancy or cross, they have a 50% chance of getting a red flower out of it and a 50% chance of getting a white flower. Every single cross is a coin flip. So let's assume you flip the coin 8 times and it all comes up heads. That means it's perfectly viable to have a family of straight red kids out of this combo. But that doesn't mean that the tails side of the coin didn't exist. It just happened to not happen. Does that make sense? So this isn't the proportion of their kids. This is the probability that if I get pregnant again, what color will the flower be? Okay. You're going to end up, so in this case, it was half and half. This is a classic one. It's the double heterozygous one. I'm just going to throw this in there. So this is no longer applied to here. So I'll hide that so that does not cause confusion. Okay, so now it's big R, little r, big R, little r. Let me reset my colors here. What's the combo? Well, the big R comes down from dad and the big R comes over. So we end up with big R, big R. The big R comes across, the little r comes down. We go big R, little r. The big R comes down, the little r comes across. We end up with big R, little r. And the last one, the little r comes down, the little r comes across. We end up with little r, little r. So now what colors are these kids? Well, this one, big R, both of those are reds, so the child comes out red. Big R, little r. The big R overpowers the little r, so the child comes out red. Big R, little r. The big R overpowers the little r, so the child comes out red. The little r and the little r are both white alleles, so since there's no red to hide it, the white comes out on this one and it stays white. So now, what proportion, what are the odds that I would get a red flower? 75% in this case. Before it was 50%, now it's 75. You see why? Because 3 out of 4 of my random possibilities result in a red flower. And 1 out of 4 results in a white flower. So in this case, I would have a 75% chance of getting a red flower out of it. Before it was a 50% chance. Because, let me put my colors back here. This was how it was before. Because we had, because this was the combo. So as you can see, the ratio changes based on what the combo is. If I had big R, little r, we'd get big R's on both of these, big R's on both of those, little r's across. And all 4 of them would end up being big R, little r, big R, little r. And even though this parent's white and that parent's red, all 4 of my possible kids would be red because I would end up with big R, little r, big R, little r, big R, little r, big R, little r. Okay. Now this is an important point for me to make because everyone does it. It's logical. It's intuitive. They say that the 2 alleles I am working with are red and white. Thus, red will be R and white will be W. So you would have a W over here. Now, why doesn't this work? For this class, I suppose you could possibly get away with it. I don't encourage it. You won't get shot down if you do it, but it'll get very confusing really quick. There are problems in genetics where we're not just looking at one trait. And then if you end up throwing in 2 traits into the example, you end up with bigger Punnett squares, which you're not going to do in this class. But then you'd end up trying to keep track of 4 different letters and what letter belongs to what, and it goes absolutely mayhem. So what we recommend is you pick one letter, use the capital version as the dominant trait, and the lowercase version as the recessive trait in order to avoid confusion. Like that. Okay. One other point before I move on. Make sure to choose a letter. It doesn't really matter what letter you choose. It's entirely arbitrary anyway. It's just for us to keep track of the combos. God doesn't really care what letter we pick. Though strategically, it's probably a good idea to pick certain letters. Now, here's why. Especially, it's less bad on a computer, but especially if you're handwriting it. What if I pick the letter O? It's big O, little o. But what if I accidentally make my little o too big? Well, now I can't tell the difference. So I need to be able to tell the difference visually between a big one and a little one so I do not get confused, especially when I start crossing these things up and I'm handwriting this, I'll lose myself completely and I'll start thinking bigs are smalls and smalls are bigs and all sorts of messy stuff. So in all of my examples today, I'm going to use the letter R because R has a very visible difference between R or big R and little r. But there are other letters you could use like B. B has a very visible difference. D has a visible difference. A has a visible difference. But stay away from ones like Z and S and K even that can be interpreted either way based on how you write them. So I'm going to use R for this example today. But again, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes people will pick a letter that involves their example, like R would be good for red, or maybe P if P were a good letter, which it probably isn't because, again, a little p looks like a big P sometimes, for petal color or something like that. Okay. That is basically the simple inheritance page. What the simple inheritance page is doing is we've gone over here and noted that there are 3 different pieces to this. Parents, or you have to know the inheritance pattern. Such as dominant or recessive. You have to know the genotype of the parents and find out the genotypes of the kids. These are the 3 different variables involved here. And usually when you're given a problem, you'll be given 2 of them and asked to figure out what the 3rd one is, and it could be any 2. For example, in this case, I told you in roses, flower color is an autosomal trait. So I told you red flower color is dominant to white flower color. It's autosomal, and it is inherited. Red is dominant to white. I told you the inheritance pattern. If a red flower who had a white parent mates with a white flower, that is enough information for you to figure out the genotypes of the parents. What is the probability of getting a red rose? That's the question. So in this question, this is what I'm asking you to figure out. So I gave you 2 of the 3 variables, and I'm telling you to find the 3rd one. It won't always be like this. It can be any one of these 3 that I asked you about as long as I give you the other 2. So for example, if I give you if I tell you that the 2 parents are a certain color, and here are the colors that their kids come out to be, what is the inheritance pattern? right? Then you'd have to observe it and just think of the Punnett square. Run it through possible scenarios. If, let's say we've got, trying to think, yellow pea pods and green pea pods. Okay, so let's say that's my question. So I'm telling you, we have, let me write it out here, 2 green pea pods, or 2 green pea plants are crossed and results in 5, let's see, how do I do this? In 3 green plants and 1 yellow. What is the inheritance pattern? Well, look at it. You know that there are green pea plants involved, that both parents are green. Now I can come look at the kids to see what is dominant and what is recessive to get clues. In this case, notice both parents were the same color, but the kids ended up being 2 different colors. So what does that automatically flag to me? One of those 2 colors is recessive. In this case, both parent, if that one kid got the recessive, if a kid got a recessive trait, that means the parents each have to have had the recessive trait. Because remember when we did it over here, big R, little r, big R, little r, you end up with big R, big R, big R, little r, bigger, or little r, and little r, little r. So that means, let me take away the color here. So that means the only possible combo to get a recessive child is little r, little r. And if both of these parents are big R, then you couldn't have a kid with little r, and you'd only see one color, but we don't. So we know both parents have to be half and half. Does that make sense? Because I'm seeing 2 colors in the offspring, but only 1 in the parents. So that shows me that they're heterozygous. Now I can go to look to see which one is dominant and which one's recessive. Well, there's several ways I could go about it. I've got a whole lot more green plants than I do yellow. Well, I expect to have a 75% chance of getting a green plant if green is dominant. So that makes sense, having a lot more green plants than yellow, because I have higher chances of getting a green plant. And here's the other hint. We know that the parents are heterozygous, and what color are they? They're green, which means green is dominant to yellow because they're heterozygous, so whatever color shows up is the dominant one. The numbers aren't always so clear-cut. In this case, I made it easy, where 3 represented, oh, well, there's 3 possible combos, and 1 that was yellow. But what if I give you one that is like, there are 7 green plants and 2 yellow? Well, that's 9 kids. You can't split that into 4 evenly. But look, you can still see a pattern. You'd expect the dominant one to show up more frequently because you'd have higher odds. And look at that. Green shows up more frequently than yellow. So I would expect, again, green to be dominant to yellow. There's my answer. So there's an example of figuring out the inheritance pattern when I give you these 2. Or it could be the reverse. It could say, these are the genotypes of the kids. And this is the inheritance pattern. What are the genotypes of their parents? Does that make sense? That's the entire simple Mendelian worksheet. And if you can get down those principles, then you've got simple Mendelian in the bag. If you're still struggling with simple Mendelian, please, please, please come schedule a tutoring appointment with me. I've got lots of availabilities. Last time I checked, I think I still have 22 throughout the rest of the week. Maybe 21 by now. Can't remember. But lots of availabilities as of when this video was made on Monday. Okay. All right. Good. So that is basically everything you need to know here on Simple Mendelian. Down here, what they're asking you to do is do a little story, basically. So they're having you to figure out what the genotype of this gentleman is, and this gentleman, and this lady, and that lady. And then we're saying, now that you know those genotypes, what are their possible kid combos, is what we're asking you to do down there. So that's just kind of a two-step thing. You're figuring out the genotypes, and now you're using that info to come out with the kids. Again, we're giving you two variables, and you figure out the third. All right. So that's it with Simple Mendelian. That's all I'm going to do with it. Let's go to the sex-linked one, because this is where it gets hard. So let me actually make a separate video for that. So I'll stop this one here and post a second video about sex-linked Mendelian inheritance.